Listen up. This young lady here is running the marathon for Brigham and Women's Hospital. So skip around Estella and donate to a good cause.
We'd gotten a kind of one-liner of what the idea of potentially writing a book might be, and he was still deciding if he was going to write the book. So I got on the phone with him and kind of talked him through what it meant to kind of expose yourself basically to the world in a book, and what it also meant to potentially expose yourself to the world in a film. You know, it was so interesting and wild at the time because, you know, the tragedy was fairly fresh, and he was in full-on recovery mode, so it was important to us that we kind of protected him as well. But he was very interested in telling the story and making sure it got out there to hopefully help and inspire other people. And during the course of the development, during the course of the filmmaking, and even during the course of kind of editing and where the movie is now, he's kind of a different person than he was back then. And we've seen the changes, and we've seen this guy go from someone who's really suffering into someone who's gotten himself to a really good place.
It's about family and the journey that Jeff takes, you know, through the course of his story and through the course of the movie. And it's a love story between, you know, he and his girlfriend who he ended up marrying. It's really more of an intimate story about what it is to struggle to sort of become the person that people see you as, and that's really what it's about. It's a story of a family and a guy who's just struggling to try to stay above water amidst all the sort of fanfare and everything that he goes through.
No, it was actually kind of serendipitous. I mean, John Polano, the screenwriter, wrote this brilliant script, and we did a couple drafts with him. And he's just such an excellent writer. There was a blueprint there for something really magical. And Jake, on his own accord, read the script without any offers or anything. And we got an incoming call from his agent saying Jake Gyllenhaal read the script. He thinks he'd love to play this role of Jeff Bowman. And he was kind of our first choice anyway, so it worked out that way. And man, he is unbelievable in every way. A talent really kind of unparalleled. Well, what was important about Stronger was because it is such a dramatic tale, and we wanted to be extremely sensitive to the nature of the events, but also sensitive to the people. These are real people. We needed and wanted and required, and the script had kind of an honest sense of humor about it, which Jeff himself has. He's an incredibly likable, funny guy. So the idea that David had done both dramas and comedies was very appealing because this was going to be a tonal tightrope, and he nailed it.
We had lunch with Howie Sanders, an agent at UTA, and he said, I've got a book for you guys. I think you should take a look at it. And
he also said, by the way, this is going to be a challenging one.
And we ended up, both of us, reading it that night. I don't know why, because usually it can take us, you know, or me, 2-3 weeks to read a book. We both read it, we both loved it, and called Howie and said we wanted to get involved with it. And we got on the phone with RJ Palacio and talked to her and told her what we wanted to do with it and how much we loved it, because it affected both of us. And we just said, we have to make this movie. And so ultimately they gave us the rights to be able to go shop it, and we shopped it all over town, and finally ended up at Lionsgate. And the story with Julia, and by the way, everybody at Lionsgate read this book. I mean, from the top down, because everybody read it and said, you got to read this, you got to read this. And so they were as on board as we were, and that's what you want with something like this. You want passion. Then as for Julia, we got an incoming call from Kevin Huvane saying, we understand you have this book and Julia's read it and she would like to be involved in some capacity. And so we said, great. And ultimately, you know, we said, well, you know, we'd love her to play the mom. And Todd and I met with her and Kevin, which was really, we did it in Malibu near her house and my house, and it was really a luncheon about Pretty Woman, and going back and talking about stories that we both had from Pretty Woman. So it was great to reconnect with her, and she had stayed with it. I think she committed 2 years before we ended up getting it green lit. So she was on board from day one and stayed on board and committed and made the movie, which is a pretty unusual thing that the timing sort of worked, but that's her passion for wanting to be a part of the film.
That's kind of what this book has been. I mean, from us reading it at the very beginning, from Howie reading it saying, this is amazing, it's going to be hard. From us reading it saying, this is amazing, we don't know how we're going to make this. Julia, the studio, all these people have been involved in this movie for a long time. The only reason it got made is because the material's so good and people, like David said, pass it along, and the more people read it, and then of course the book became this kind of phenomenon, thankfully, which helped us get our green light.
Well, we had come to them with an idea, God, I don't know how many years ago.
It's like 8 years ago or something.
About doing a Beauty and the Beast from the Beast's point of view. And, you know, everybody's looking for how do you get into something that's already been done. So we actually developed a drama of Beauty and the Beast from the Beast's point of view, and it was sort of dark and edgy and had magic and all that. And they quite liked the script. But then Frozen came out. And the timing of that, they said we should do Beauty and the Beast and we should do a sort of reimagining of the animated classic. So they asked us if we would turn it around and attack it from that point of view, which we happily did, and that's sort of how it started. And that's how it became a musical, because they wanted to do a musicalized version. Then the challenge was, well, how do you do that in live action, and how do you do it so you don't mess up, you know, the classic that they had made? And that's how it sort of began.
It's not uncommon to say dramas are really hard to get off the ground now, certainly in the studio system. So we feel fortunate to have two this year that we're both really proud of. One happened to be a book that became a sensation, so there's an IP that had value. And, you know, it's hard to tell if that book hadn't sold as many copies and become such a worldwide sensation that it did, if the movie would have gotten made or not. Don't know. I mean, the story's good enough that it should have, but it's hard for us to tell. It certainly helped when the wave of momentum came with all the book sales for the studio to say, okay, there's a reason to kind of spend millions and millions of dollars to put this out in the marketplace. Stronger, you know, that one, it was a book, it was a bestseller, but it certainly wasn't a wide bestseller in the range that Wonder was. But we had a piece of a script that was so incredibly brilliant, and then of course Jake coming on board helps that. But they're really hard to get off the ground, and that saying of, you know, what makes a movie theatrical or not? What compels people to go to the theater? So for us, you know, it's hard for us to determine back and forth whether you know, a story's worthy of that or not. But we like to start from the middle, we like to start from the center. Like, what's the reason to make the movie? And if there's a compelling, emotional core of the film, then we feel it'll move us, and hopefully will move other people. And then it's our job to make it commercial.
And I think that while you have all these huge studio movies and superhero movies and fairy tale movies, I think, you know, the creative community is always going to want to make dramas, and there will be somebody out there who will want to make it. It's just changing the landscape as to who's going to make those movies, whereas the studios used to. Now other companies are coming forward and wanting to do it. So I think it's hard, and it's harder because it's not a 5 studio shopping spree anymore. You've got to get out there and work and try to expose it to as many people as you can. But I think people want to make good stories, and I think they always will.